Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to today's show. My name is Tim Dimmick and will be your host for today as we continue with our Real Estate Trendsetter Series. This series of broadcasts has been put together here on Business Innovators Radio to share some insight into different parts of the real estate transaction that one will face when buying or selling a home. We invite in top producing realtors each to talk about different segments. Today we have with us Sue Deily from RE/MAX to talk with us about pricing your home correctly. Sue offers her customers a lot of experience with a standing 31-year career in the real estate field, serving both buyers and sellers in the Bucks County area. Welcome to the show, Sue.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're quite welcome. We're excited to have you here with us. Before we get into our subject today, I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about your background, why you chose real estate as a career, and what you enjoy most about it today.
Well, Tim, as you mentioned, I've been doing it for 31 years, and I feel like real estate is my passion. I've always been very interested in it from the time I got my license, which was 31 years ago, and was interested in looking into buying investment properties and things like that, and then just was very intrigued with the whole process. At the time before I got my license, I was actually working as an admin at a local large company from 9 to 5. And when our middle son was born, he actually was born with a congenital heart defect and was sent to a hospital, children's hospital in Philadelphia for heart surgery. So at the time, my husband and I felt like, we just had to apply for a leave of absence that so that, I could spend the time necessary with him. Well, while he was home recovering, he was doing well, and I was reading an article about real estate agents and, their whole life and how their work schedule goes and things like that. And talking it over with my husband, we thought that would really work out well for us. I had a keen interest in it, and while he was, continuing his recovery, like, I could go out and do my appointments in the evenings and weekends, and my husband would be around to take care of him and our other son. And then things just progressed from there. It just really clicked with me. And as he got older and he was doing very well, and our older son, we went on actually to have a third son, and it worked for me great then too. I could be with them, volunteer with them in their classrooms during the day while they were growing up, be at their sporting events, and then just do my work, my appointments in the evenings and weekends, and during the day, we had both of our moms to help us out.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
So you have, let's get into this subject of pricing your home correctly, because man, this is a big deal when it comes to the real estate transaction in my eyes. I've witnessed so many people get this wrong, and I have a pretty good understanding as to why, but I'd love to hear it from your standpoint of view, being the realtor. Typically you're going to have somebody contact you about listing their home for sale. They feel that they're ready, and almost always, someone has a preconceived value established in their mind as to what their home's worth. So tell us what the process is, and where do you start in establishing that right price for your clients' homes?
Tim, that is so true, and it is probably like the single most important thing to just get it right the first time. And so to start the process, I set up an appointment to walk through the home with them, and I ask them to tell me what updates they've done since they've purchased the home, and also the amenities. I also like to know, if there was something there that was original that they changed, and more importantly, what made them purchase the home in the first place? What made them fall in love with it? I always like to know that.
Right.
After I get all that information together, I then search the comps. The comps are comparable solds, pendings, and we also look at what's active on the market. And that's, just really important to make sure you're comparing everything correctly.
Right. Well, too often I see prospective sellers, they come up with their own list of properties, right, that have sold in the area or surrounding area. And I think that plays a big part in them, establishing that what they believe is the price point that they should be at. But too often there's way too many factors that I always say that, people aren't taking into consideration. I mean, location alone, you can be in the next town over and just see an incredible difference in price for the same type of home. So what are some of the things that are most overlooked, would you say, by prospective sellers when doing this? And when is it good comparable in their mind or our minds? When is it not a good comparable? So what are the things that factor into that?
Well, the things that factor into it is a lot of times you have to look at things, first of all, through the eyes of what an appraiser is going to look at, because down the road that becomes a big factor. And I've taken several broker courses on this subject just to get a really good understanding of trying to get in the mind of an appraiser and what they're going to look for. One of the things is that, and when you're in a certain neighborhood, like a development, this is more for a development type home, the appraisers are going to look in that development first, and that's where they're going to draw their comps from. So if you sell a townhouse in a development or a house in a development, and maybe it's really got all the bells and whistles, and you're trying to get the highest price in there, and then the owner might say, oh, well, I know this one over on the other side of town or down, 10 miles away, they're getting this price for that. You can't do that, because the appraiser you're going to run into an appraisal problem with that. That's not what the appraisals will do. They will really try to keep it within the neighborhood.
Gotcha. They're going to keep it as close as they can.
Yeah. The next thing is that the condition is another big factor. The sellers, when you're looking online and trying to get your own information, you really don't know what the condition is of the other properties that you're comparing it to. And then, another big factor that comes into play is if you're comparing your home to a bank-owned home or a foreclosure or a short sale. The appraisers will not rely on those, which is probably a good thing, because they're usually selling for less.
Right.
So you want to just throw those right out. And then the other thing is you just want to make sure that you're comparing the same square footage, because a lot of times, when you're looking and comparing your home to another one, if you check the square footage in the public records, you're going to see that, somebody else that sold for more money may have more square footage than what you have.
Right. Well, that's actually a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because there is a real big factor. You can have two homes that look identical, and one of them, and when you look at it online, it might say it's got 1,000 square foot more, and you shake your head and say there's no way it's got 1,000 square foot more, only to find out that the basement is a walkout basement and there's access. And then you're actually able to count that square footage, correct?
Yes, as long as it's finished and heated.
Right. So in comparison to a home that doesn't have that walkout basement, you're not able to count that.
Right.
So square footage, it plays a big part, obviously. You also hit on condition. And I think this is a huge one, because, there's all kinds of different people. We all live different lifestyles.
Right.
So obviously the condition of our home is reflective of our lifestyle in many cases. And there are some people that, you brought up the neighborhood. There's people that will have the income. They live in their house. They love their house. It's their, their castle per se, and improve it beyond improved, right? And they'll put every improvement you can think of into that house. What are the dangers when doing that to a house that, whether it's in a development or whether it's not? I think it's probably even more related to the area that you're in. But what are the downfalls that can happen by over-improving your house?
Well, that's a great question, and I always tell my clients at settlement and encourage them to stay in touch with me after the fact, just for, picking my brain about things like that. If somebody's going to make improvements to their home, I've had lots of my past clients call and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this or that to the home. What do you think? Is that going to add value? If so, how much? And I always preface it with whatever their idea is, just to say, do this for your enjoyment. How long are you going to be there? You have to take all these things into account.
Right.
If you're going to redo your kitchen and you're going to go, top of the line, everything, you definitely will get more money out of it when you go to sell. But, you have to really be careful where you draw the line. And I always make myself available for consultations, personal consultations with people to just go over that. And I always, ask them, tell me specifically what you want to do.
Right.
A new roof is always certainly a good thing, but that's more of a necessity than the cosmetics.
Right. Yeah, that was a good point about the kitchens. You can spend a lot of money in a kitchen today, and although you will get more money out of it, you're probably not going to get out what you spent in comparison to somebody's, the typical average kitchen in a house, because again, the upgrades just cost you so much more than it's going to mean in a price when it comes to the appraisal. And that's a really tricky thing when it comes to the appraisals. Same with the roof. You say, well, I got a brand new roof on here. Well, yeah, the roof is new, but a roof in good standing is an expectation among an appraiser or among anybody buying a house. Not that it's not taken into consideration, but if that roof costs you $10,000, you're not getting $10,000 more for your house because it's a new roof.
Right.
Yeah. So now you got the other side of the coin, though. So how about the other side where you've run into a property and the place has just not been maintained as near like it should have been? What kind of challenges do you run into when that happens, Sue?
Well, you have to just really make sure it's reflected in the price. That is the biggest thing in a nutshell. And that's the point that I really try to drive home with my clients and customers. For me to say that I'm going to price it the same as the house next door, when in fact the house next door may have been updated inside, I'm not doing the seller or my client any favors. That's the biggest thing. I mean,
right.
Once in a while, sometimes people will be in a position where they're able to make the improvements, and I've certainly worked with sellers along those lines, and it's worked out well for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I get right down to the nitty-gritty with them, give them the paint colors. If the property needs painting and wallpaper removed, I tell them exactly what colors to paint the walls and the trim. If they're going to put in new carpet, work with them on that. But if they're not able to do that, and not everybody is,
mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of we just really have to price it accordingly, and it's probably going to be priced lower than maybe the house next door that had all these improvements done.
In a situation like that, what kind of things do you have to pay attention to that, again, would affect the appraisal? Because there's certain things, I'm sure, that depending on the buyer that you have for that house or comes in and makes that offer, if they're financing that home, there are obviously things that a bank is not going to allow to exist upon that purchase, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I discuss this with my sellers. If there is peeling paint or electrical issues, when we have buyers going for government financing, and they're a big part of our market these days.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just for the first time townhomes and things like that. It could be you can get FHA and VA mortgages up to in the high in the 300s. So if that's the case, we have to really look at it once again through the appraiser's eyes. What they're going to look for is peeling paint, frayed electric, rails, handrails. That's kind of an easy fix, but I would say the two biggest factors are the peeling paint and the electric issues, and of course leaking roofs also.
Right. They're certainly limiting themselves to the buyer that can buy that property if they don't fix those type of things. So the last thing I would like to talk to you about are, what are the consequences of not pricing your house right? Because I see this time and time again. People come in, they invite a realtor in, the realtor tells them one thing, they do another. And obviously, as the realtor, it's their house. You got to honor their requests. But too often, they don't take the advice of their realtor, and they get it wrong. So what are the consequences? What do you see typically happen in those situations?
Well, typically, Tim, what happens is the property sits on the market, and it becomes what we call like an aged listing, where the days on market just keep accumulating. That creates almost like a stigma for the house. Really, your best time to sell is in your first 30 days, and if you've got it priced right, it should sell within the 30 days. I try to work with my sellers if they are open for this and they feel like they want to try a little bit of a higher price. I will set up a plan with them, and I will say, we'll try it. Depending on the time of the year, that plays a big part in it. But I'll say, we will try it at your price for 3 weeks. If we don't get an offer or showings in that first 3 weeks, we need to set up a plan where it's going to automatically be dropped. The price will be dropped, and we have to do a significant enough drop to get the market's attention. And so once again, then we go for another 3 to 4 weeks, monitor the feedback, just really check and see how things are going. And if nothing happens, do another price reduction. If a seller's really not willing to do that, I don't want to turn them down, but if I just feel like their price is too unrealistic, I would rather turn them down than let them down. That's my motto.
Right. Well, and what people don't realize is, so you guys spend a lot of money in advertising, to get these properties out there, and to know that it's not going to sell and we're going to end up at, this point in the end anyway. I really think it's a hard stance to take, but probably the correct one. And I've witnessed so many times where customers don't price their house properly, and it sits on the market for 6 months. It gets that stigma, like you talked about, and which then people start asking the question, what's wrong with this house? Why has it been on the market so long? And it can even get that way from the price reductions.
Right.
People say, well, wait a minute, it was this, now it's this, now it's this, and you see you lower it 2 or 3 times, only to get to the point where you needed to be to begin with, and probably would have gotten the activity that you wanted right out of the gate. So I encourage people to always listen to the realtors. I mean, you guys know the markets, what's out there, what's selling, what price point it's selling at, and that's the best advice I could certainly give somebody. So listen, I certainly appreciate you taking the time, Sue. We're about out of time, but before we go, I'd love for you to share your contact information with our listeners in case they have any questions that they'd like answered or would like to talk to you further about, this subject or any other subject as far as that goes, in the real estate.
Sure. It's Sue Deily, and my email is pretty easy to remember. It's SueSellsHouses@gmail.com. And my office number is 215-538-4413. That's my direct line. And feel free to call me with any questions or comments anytime.
Great, Sue. Thanks again for taking your time out of your schedule to talk with us today, and also to our listeners for tuning in. And remember to check back for our next interview in our Real Estate Trendsetter Series, where we interview top producing realtors on different subjects to help you better understand the process of your next real estate transaction.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.